Flow Designer is a subtopic under the Java platform usage. So these are outline what is a flow components, and connecting pages and commands. Okay, a flow is typically a representation of an algorithm, a workflow, a process showing the steps that have to be taken in order to completely execute a flow. So it's very similar to a flow chart. So there's always like a start or a begin and a set of components that together work interactively to perform an operation. Then you have the end where the flow ends. So in a typical scenario in Deja Vu, you have a flow that has a start, then you have a page, probably a generic UI page that just shows hello world, title and entity, of course. Then you just end the flow. So step one, start, then you have a generic UI page in here, then you have the end flow. So there are different flow components in Deja Vu. You have commands, you have forms or pages, you have variables, and you have the BPM item, which is Business Process Manager. Then you have some other special components like a display message, end flow, and some others. So you have commands. A command is typically a component that has been created on Service Builder that basically represents the logic layer in a typical, or the logic layer or a controller layer in a typical MVC architecture. So it's the part where all logic is being done within a flow. You have a BPM. BPM is a special command that delays the continuation of a flow based on a set of rules of configuration. Well, it delays it in the sense that it requires a user's consent to allow the execution of the flow to the next step. You have forms represent components that have been created, Service Builder that represents UI pages, custom UI pages in sense, or generic UI pages. And you have a variable. A variable in Flow Designer is usually a placeholder that can hold data within the entire lifespan of a flow and can be reused at any point within a flow. Then you have special components within a flow, like a display message component that does displays message as a notification, an end flow, which is the component that ends the flow, that specifies where the flow should end, and a go to that represents a call for a particular another flow at any point within the flow. So a go to represents a disconnect from that, a jump out from that flow to another flow, and when the flow is done, it continues as the flow that it left off from. Then connecting pages and commands. Well, connecting pages and commands is fairly straightforward in a case where the output of a page is usually the expected input for a command. So if the output of a page, for instance, maybe a form that is supposed to get details of a particular user, and a command is supposed to save that particular form, so the input expected by the command usually is either an entity that represents all the properties or fields of a particular page, or a list of fields that represent all the properties from the form page. So basically there's a one-to-one mapping between a page and command. So when you are on Flow Designer, all you just need to do is just to specify what field from the page is supposed to map to the other field from a command. So it's fairly straightforward. So that is what we call command mapping. Then you have something called variable mapping of Flow Designer. Variable mapping, essentially, just like I mentioned, variables are placeholders within a flow that can hold data. So for instance, if you have a step where you need to move data from one page to a command, but unfortunately the command doesn't have the parameter input that is expected by the form page. You can actually pass the output of that parameter to a variable, and variable holds the data. Then maybe down the flow you need that particular data, then you can now specify that you want to get the data from the flow as a variable, so you'll be able to map it as a variable to the command. So it allows you to pass data that don't directly map one-to-one from a page to a command. So you pass it through a variable, then you receive it from a variable at any point down within the flow that is required.